How important is relationship building for business owners and marketers?
Very. And I've been thinking a lot more about this recently. And like as our business has gone on, it seems more apparent how important building long-term relationships is. I think when starting out and we were like, I didn't even realize that we were building relationships. We were just doing stuff. It wasn't that clear as to the benefit to our business. But now we're like 5 or 6 years in, opportunities are starting to happen that you can directly relate to relationships we've built in the past. And like anything, whenever anything's working for us, I think we should be sharing it with other anchors.
Do you know what? I feel like cringy about this though.
I
Can
do
I
as
just be
well.
open about this episode? Like, saying like, oh, you've got to build relationships to make your business grow. It feels like, I don't know.
Wanky.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's just put it out there. Lloyd.
Like, it feels like,
right.
pretend to be mates with this person.
No,
And then, like, it's about who you know, not what you know.
I totally get what you're saying. And this is nothing to do with pretending to build wanky fake relationships.
Okay, good, because I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I promise you, Lloyd. Like I'm in total agreement. I think that is cringe and not authentic and unethical sometimes. So it's not about that.
Okay.
What this is about is looking back at our journey of growing this business and looking at about some of the relationships we've built and how they've turned into some really great opportunities for our business, and analyzing that and looking at the lessons we've learned from that. It's not going to be like really.
And I suppose putting yourself in the position and the mindset where you're open to new relationships isn't like a bad thing and a horrible thing. It's not like, right, this is the plan of how to pretend to be mates with somebody to have personal gain.
No.
I think I suppose that's the difference. Whereas if you don't have that mindset of, okay, I'm open to meeting new people and talking about them and us and having,
And if we I've got a number of examples I want to share with you, first of all, to give context and how effective this can be. But then I want us to analyze how that happened and maybe some lessons that we've learned along the way that could help listeners think about decisions they could make to help them build better relationships that help them drive new business.
Yeah.
So let me give you one example, first of all.
Go for it.
So, and again, this is very meta, but Adobe Express sponsoring this podcast, which has been huge for us. We're so buzzing to have the opportunity for Adobe Express to sponsor our podcast. We've been using Adobe products for years. I don't know if you've noticed my hoodie, Lloyd.
Oh, that's really cool, Dan. Is that an Adobe Express hoodie?
Yeah, so I actually flew out to LA last week to Adobe Max, which is Adobe's flagship event where they talk about all the cool stuff happening with their products and that kind of thing. And I was invited out there as part of them sponsoring our podcast.
Nice.
But to look at how that happened, so the way that we got this podcast sponsorship, or one of the main sort of influencing factors, was we'd built a relationship over years with the founder of a company that got acquired by Adobe. And that was our initial connection with Adobe.
I liked your hand movement.
Do you like my hand
People
movement there?
that listen to that won't know, but Dan's hand movement for initial connection
There was
one I've never seen before. Kind of like he was following a circle
it wasn't
with
like
two hands.
one finger, it was
meeting
a
in the middle.
forefinger. Yeah.
I mean, if that's not a reason to watch the full episode on YouTube, I don't know what is.
So that was the initial connection. Lloyd, if you could do the action, thank you. Obviously, there's a whole other, there's us building our audience online and creating great content and lots of other things that contributed to them actually sponsoring the podcast. But building that relationship with the founder of a company that got acquired by Adobe was the first point of contact that helped this happen.
Yeah.
Which has been really big for the podcast, which is really
Yes.
good. Another example, so when we worked with the likes of FIFA, Citibank, Nestle, that opportunity came about because we had built a solid relationship with some other marketers over a period of years that recommended us to deliver on a piece of work that they kind of had a brief that they looked at and thought we could do a great job with. They put us forward for that piece of work. So that was, and working with those household name brands, again, has been pivotal in helping us to improve what we're doing and work with more brands like that.
I think a point that I think is important is we haven't just had these opportunities because someone introduced us or because we built this relationship. So you have to be doing brilliant stuff and you have to be communicating the right things, doing great work.
You have to have the content ecosystem, which we spoke about in last week's episode,
which I'm sure you've already listened to if you're listening to this. But even if we're doing all that good stuff, these opportunities that Dan has spoken about, they probably wouldn't have come about without building those relationships initially. It's that initial spark of, oh, yeah, I can recommend these guys. Or, you know, with the Adobe Express sponsoring the podcast, like, oh, I know some guys that could be good for us to support with their podcast that would be good for Adobe. And then it goes on from there.
Yeah, exactly. Good hand movement, Lloyd.
Thank you.
And I guess to give you an example of the kind of work that's gone into building those relationships, and like Lloyd said, this wasn't like necessarily planned. It's all kind of been quite organic building these relationships, but analyzing how it happened. So one example of the Adobe Express sponsorship of the podcast, the guy that we built a relationship with, I probably saw him across a period of 3 years, probably a few events a year. He was speaking at those events, and whenever I saw him, we'd have a great discussion and a chat, and we'd just, you know, chat about marketing and stuff. We also created content in for the tool that we're mentioning that Adobe acquired. You actually did I think an interview.
I hosted a panel, I think.
You did a panel, yeah.
Yes.
And it's all these small things over a period of time. But I think the important thing to note as well, like you said, Lloyd, is that it's been quite organic in the sense, like, we haven't strategically sat down and thought, right, we're going to have a 10-minute chat with this guy when we see him to make sure that he knows what we do and stuff. Like,
we never set out a strategy for building a relationship with this person. And I think if we did, we probably wouldn't have built the relationship we did, because it would have been fake rather than actually just, oh, we get on with this person. Oh, they've asked us to help out with this. Yeah, we'd like to help them with that.
Yeah.
Like you say, more organic rather than, right, you speak to him now, and then in 10 minutes, I'm going to speak to him about what we do.
This is interesting though, right? So I'm not going to mention who I've spoken to about this, but I recently spoke to someone who mentioned a marketing strategy that they've heard has been really effective, where it's like an account-based marketing strategy where you identify a person that you want to build a relationship with, and I mean, it didn't sound like something I'd want to do, but some people are doing this. Like, they're identifying, like, I don't know, the CMO of Nike or Adidas, and doing a ton of research to figure out what they're interested in and the events they go to, and then having a whole strategy to, like, have a conversation with them and stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't really sound like something I don't know. It all seems very sort of manufactured, I guess. But what we found works really well is having this kind of organic approach to building relationships. I think the key thing is doing things like going to events where the people you want to build relationships with will be at. Because I think looking back at some of the best relationships we've built in terms of things that have generated opportunities are when we've gone to industry events and just, like, you know, after the event, it's like an evening thing and you just hang out and chat and get to know people.
I think it's a big important part of this is just being open to building relationships. So, like we're saying, our kind of strategy isn't necessarily target this person. Right, we're going to have a plan to speak to them for 7 minutes about ourselves, and then we're going to meet them at this thing. But I suppose just being open to new relationships, and I don't mean like, you know, relationships. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But you know, to friendships or like working relationship. You don't have to be best mates with these people, but you can work together and get on while you work together and have that kind of relationship. And I suppose going in without a plan but being open to it, like outside of work, some examples from me. Dan will take the mickey out of me because he'll like say that I'm trying to say I'm a brilliant person. But so I met someone when I was volunteering at the homeless shelter.
You were doing what, Lloyd?
Volunteering at the homeless shelter.
Oh, okay. I mentioned that one before.
Yeah. And we ended up working with like her stepdaughter, daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
Delivering some training. I didn't go into that going, right, I've got to see here, where can I build some business relationships that are going to give this a positive ROI for me?
Yeah.
There's also a guy that I did a charity walk, and I can't remember if he made the first contact or I did, but he gave me some advice on walking 100 kilometers that I was trying to do because he'd done a long walk. Then I asked him some stuff and we were messaging. He sponsored me. I sponsored him on a walk he was doing.
And this was like a year ago, right?
Yeah. And I had no thoughts that it could have any business consequences. It was just a nice guy that gave me some advice, and I was messaging back, and I thought, oh, he's doing that. I'll sponsor him. And he's a client of ours now. But a client of ours like a year or year and a half later from that. Yeah. And I was like, I recognise that name. And so I do think just being open to not being closed and thinking, no, I've got my mates, my people want to talk to, like I'm going to stick over here. Being open to speaking to new people and not knowing where it's going to lead is a really important part of this.
Yeah. I think there's kind of two key parts to it that we've sort of touched on. There's the making sure you're going to the right places where the kinds of people you'd want to build relationships with are going, like as a general strategy. And we found that things like events are good for that. But the second part, which that example touches on, is I guess it's like just being a nice person and doing the right thing. Like you messaging this guy back and forth, advising each other about this charitable walk and sponsoring each other, that you had no idea that was going to turn into a business relationship. You were just being you and being a nice person, sponsoring someone that sponsored you. And so I guess it's that, like the thing of like, don't be a dick, which is weird advice to give. But I think I believe a lot in karma, like what goes around comes around. And if you put good things out to the world, you're going to get good things back.
We're seeing this constantly. Like we're saying, these people that we've, there's an event that we're hosting for some people we know soon, and we're not being paid for that. But we've built a relationship over time. We're like, yeah, well, we'll do that. That's something we'll do. And I think doing those things for the right reasons of just like, oh yeah, they're really nice and they've given us some advice in the past, would really like to help them. I think if you look too much at what's the ROI of this time I'm going to invest right now, a lot of the things we've done that have built up relationships are definitely a negative ROI if you look in the short term. Like, what, I'm going to take the time to message this person some advice and stuff, but I'm not getting anything back. If you look at it really like business head on, well, I've got a limited amount of time and I should be using it for stuff that's going to bring the business a return. You wouldn't make those choices. But I think be open to not being so precise with, right, what's the ROI of this, and thinking, what's the right thing to do here? Can I help someone, or can I just spend a bit more time getting to know someone and know that there's not a return on investment for my time here?
I always feel like a percentage of your time should be put towards doing things that don't seem logical.
Yeah. Just speak to someone, do a handstand. And then take your trousers off and just shout, I quite like Satsumas. Just do things that are illogical. Great advice, Dan.
As a soundbite, that sounded terrible. But tied in with the previous conversation before.
No, great advice. Great advice.
No, what I'm trying to say is, like Lloyd said, in terms of like your marketing strategy, we focus too much on what's the ROI of everything. What's the ROI of me spending time speaking at this event that's not paid, that we're going to have to put loads of time into to make it good? That seems illogical because we're very busy and we've got lots of things to do. But we're doing it because we've built relationships with someone and it seems like a good thing to do.
Yeah, okay. Do the right things and they may seem illogical in a business sense.
Yeah. Like an example of that. So another example of a relationship we've built that's enabled us to get some great opportunities. Other agency owners. One of the other agencies that we've built a relationship with over years since we started, things like I've spoken at a number of their events. It's not been paid. I've put a lot of time and effort into developing a good presentation to do that and going to different places to do that. We've collaborated on creating content. We've met the founders in various places and had lunch together and stuff. That doesn't all necessarily seem logical. Like some of the events, there's been small audiences. I'm not expecting to reach loads of new customers or anything. But one example of that, an opportunity coming to us from that, is one of our longest standing clients came as a recommendation from them because we'd built those relationships up over time, not expecting anything from them, but doing it in a genuine way. I guess one question I'm trying to think like the Anchor's listeners now is, without it being wanky and strategic, you don't want to be like organizing 7-minute chats at events and things. How do you have some kind of structure to building relationships without it being?
Well, yeah. What else? So you've said being in the right places, basically, and
Not
being slightly illogical and not feeling like you need to have a return on investment for all of your decision, doing the right thing. What else would you suggest?
Also, I guess reflecting on where opportunities have come from to measure success, to know if what you're doing with your relationship building is working. Like us now having this discussion in chat and me having to prep for this and thinking of all of the huge opportunities that have come our way because of these relationships we've built. It's clear that this is well worth it.
Yeah.
That building relationships with the right people is working for us. I guess actually spending time to analyze where are your new clients coming from or new opportunities coming from, to see if any of them are from relationships you've built. And I guess if none of them are, then you probably need to do a better job of doing step 1 and 2 that we mentioned, of going in the right places where these people are, and then being a nice person and building those relationships.
Great.
I guess what kind of, in terms of analysing your relationship building skills, Lloyd, what kind of traits do you think someone needs to have? Like when you go to an in-person event, what are the traits someone has that make you feel like that's a nice person who I would genuinely want to like see more of, or and compared to, please get this person away from me? Yeah. I guess I'm trying to think of like, when you're out there meeting people, what are the traits that...
I think them being open to, actually talking and not
being closed off.
Some people that basically don't give a shit about anyone else. You'll even sort of small talk like, oh, excuse me, can I get past? And they'll just be like, yes. And you think, okay, you are not open to any new relationships or chats or anything. You seem like a dick already. So just being open. The simple thing of not being a dick. If someone seems like they're a kind person who actually cares about other people in any way, is always going to be a positive thing. Whereas if you're not and you're a dick, you're never going to want to build that relationship. I think people that aren't expecting anything from you or expecting anything from anyone else. So I think it's quite obvious. And I know if different people can read people differently. I think it's something that... a bit of an expert in reading people, so I read it from a mile off. But to me, it's very obvious if someone's coming in with a strategy of, I want to sell to this person, or I've got something I want from this conversation. So I think if you want to build actual relationships that are going to be beneficial for you and the other person, don't go in expecting something from them. Just go in thinking, okay, let's have a chat and see how I get on with this person, see if I've got anything in common, have an interesting conversation, rather than going in there with something you want to achieve or get from them. I think finally it's someone that actually listens. Again, it's very easy to read if you concentrate and you actually spend the time focusing on someone if they can't be bothered and they're just kind of like, oh yeah, interesting.
But my thing that I want to talk about,
or it's just like clearly, oh, you're not actually listening. You're just kind of, this is just small talk. You do it for the sake of it because you're standing here and you've got nowhere else to stand at the moment, so you've got to keep this conversation going. But you're not actually listening, and this isn't going to go anywhere.
I think we've seen some live examples of this done very badly at events before. There's a couple of examples, obviously not going to name anyone, of when we went to an event, and we spoke about this, I think, in a very early podcast episode, when we were having a chat in a group, like a nice chat with people who actually were listening to each other, and someone like barged in to us and like shoved their business card in front of us and was like, tell me the problems you have in your business. And then they started trying to like
It was like they've listened to a podcast that's the opposite of this, that said, here are the stages you have to go to build relationships to sell to people. One, ask them what their problems are. And so then you skip through everything we're talking about now of actually just being a normal, nice person.
Yeah.
They've gone to step one, ask them their problems. So they've barged in front of us, stopped genuine conversations and people that are actually listening to each other and gone, what's your problem? And they think they're doing a good thing because they're not talking about themselves. They're going, what's a problem you have? And that's setting themselves up to sell, but they're like, God, I'm so brilliant because I'm not talking about myself.
Yeah.
And that just, it's so fake and it's
this is the thing with effective like relationship building. I think it needs to not be focused so much on having a very structured plan of how you're going to do it. Because like that's
not how relationships work.
No, that example there shows that you start a relationship by not talking about business and stuff, by like actually just trying to get to know someone on a level rather than asking them their problems and to see what solutions you have as a business. Like it needs to be a bit unstructured and natural, doesn't it?
Yeah. Because that relationships aren't like that. People try and do these step by step. So build a relationship with this person. You got to do this. Like, no, that's not how relationships work. It might be that you accidentally spill a drink on someone, then you have a bit of a laugh like, oh God, this is embarrassing. I've just spilt the first time I met you. You're going to like that person more probably, even though they've spilt a drink on you, because you kind of have a laugh and like, oh, I'm so sorry. And you go through that together. Than someone that's, so can you tell me the problems that you have within your business? Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, my business solves that problem. Interesting.
Well, that's funny, you've naturally come onto that.
Coincidence, yeah. And you're like, please, I'm having a conversation with someone behind you, and you've literally barged in front of them. It's never going to work like that.
This is why I think we've mentioned events, but I really think some of the strongest relationships we've built in a natural way, like we're talking about, is at events, is at the kind of after party things at events, or when you're going to get a coffee at events and that kind of thing. I think if you're someone who, I think because of obviously COVID and stuff, a lot of people are less inclined to go out there and meet people. There's things like Zoom and everything is digital now. You don't need to go in person to meet people, but I still see a huge amount of value in building relationships face to face. I think you miss out on those kind of moments that just happen because you're there together, rather than like setting up a Zoom call.
It's the bits in between functional conversations. So like we will have a concept call where I'll be saying, here are the concepts our creative team have come up with to a client. Oh, they're really creative. And the function of that is, we've done great work. We're going to communicate that great work to you. You're going to give us feedback on these concepts and we'll move forward with the project. You miss out on those things in between, those little conversations that aren't functional, that help build the relationship. That kind of small talk and actually talking about, oh yeah, I'm a bit tired because my son's wetting the bed at the moment. Oh, I've been through that as well. My son's 25. Like those conversations that aren't functional are where you get to know people and you actually build genuine relationships. And I think people don't value those enough. And I think it's because in business you can't have a plan to do that. And if you do, it was like if I was like, mental. Oh, okay, they've got a child at bedwetting age, so I'll have that conversation. If you do it like that, it's never going to work. Oh, so how's your 6-year-old son wetting the bed? They're going to be like, can you get this guy away? Yeah, you are crazy because you've like tried to set up this thing. But if it comes up naturally and then you have a bit of a laugh about it and realize you have things in common, that's how actual relationships are built.
Yeah. And they're in person as well. Those non-functional conversations happen 1,000 times more in person. Like I can't think of a Zoom call I suppose in some ways when you're doing small talk at the start of meeting someone new on Zoom, you do have a bit of like, oh, where are you from? Oh, I've been there.
But think about it. Once you get off a Zoom call, we have those conversations after the call. Oh, how'd your call go? Yeah, all right, actually. You had this thing that went into this.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, I'm not feeling that great because last night
I went to bed.
I was up. Yeah, I went to bed. And so I was up a lot. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, I went out on a night out and I was vomiting over my shoulder while I was running. Things like that, Taylor might say in the office. So just those little things in between rather than those functional conversations. And if you think, again, our meetings at work, there's functional bits that you're like, let's get this thing done. Let's go through this process. And then while we're going up the stairs, we'll have a chat about how funny Taylor is doing that.
Yeah.
And they're the bits that help build the genuine relationships.
Do you think that like now we're doing more in-person stuff, that the kind of online events and building relationships over Zoom calls is dying out and we're going back into
Well, I don't think doing things over Zoom or anything like that is dying out. It's incredibly efficient to do good work by doing that and not spending time traveling.
Stuff, though.
Yeah,
functional.
But that's what I'm saying. I think there's a place for that. But I do think there will be a resurgence in person stuff separate to that. So I think rather than say previously you would have had 6 meetings a year with a client, and you drive there, you have a meeting, you drive back, and they're 2 hours away, and so half the day is traveling 6 times a year. I think you're still going to do 5 of those calls online and get that job done because you're like, this is incredibly efficient. We can do a much better job for you and spend that time more wisely. But you still want that one time a year where you go up and go, should we just have a couple of drinks, or should we go for lunch? Or, oh, I've got tickets to Wimbledon. You're like 10 minutes away, aren't you? Do you want to come with us? And doing fun stuff and having those conversations. I think there is definitely a place for that. It's just maybe more separated these days to the productive time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I remember when we were in lockdowns and stuff, there started to be like online networking things where you would literally have one-to-one calls with people trying to build a relationship, and it felt very sort of manufactured and unnatural, which
I think because then you're doing the functional type of conversation but trying to make it
did your son wet the bed?
It's like yeah, so what football team do you support? Oh, we can't have a chat then. Hello. And also there's like those Zoom networking things, but you can't have, when you're in a room, there could be 12 of you talking in little, 3 people here in a conversation, 2 here, and you go from one to the other. Zoom, you can't do that. You sorry, you go.
I remember a couple of like a bit less organized online events and stuff that I went to, where you went in a Zoom meeting, there was 30 people, but it was just 28 people watching 2 people have a conversation.
And you're there just
like, because you can't break out into little groups.
And it's always the 2 least socially aware people. Because people that are socially aware and build good relationships don't make 28 people listen to them talk. So, it was very strange. So I definitely think that I haven't attended any successful things where you'd build a relationship over Zoom because it's so hard, but definitely massive part of being more productive and the functional stuff. But in person, building relationships, that small talk, the in-betweeny stuff is really important.
In terms of, I just want to share a book that I'd say is probably I've learnt the most about effective relationship building from, and it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which again, the title sounds pretty wanky, but when you like hear about the different sort of segments of the book and the lessons he shares, it really makes you think like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense.
I didn't read it for years because of the title, because I thought it was exactly what we're saying is shit in this podcast, saying like, I don't want to have a step-by-step plan on how to make friends or how to, have these fake relationships, but actually once you get into it.
Like one of my favorite takeaways from the book, and this makes you really think about situations you've been in, one of the key takeaways is become genuinely interested in other people. And there's lots of depth to that point in the book, but it makes you think like, when you meet someone in person, you have a conversation and you walk, and there's 2 different things that normally happen. Sometimes you walk away from the conversation and think, wow, that was really interesting. I really loved that. And other times you think, oh my God, I want to get away from that. That was horrible. Usually, when you walk away thinking that was really interesting is when someone's asked you lots of questions and shown lots of interest in you, because we all like talking about ourselves, whether we like it or not. So if you make yourself that person at your next event you go to, or when you're somewhere to like potentially building relationships, if you make yourself the person that shows genuine interest in other people, there's going to be a lot of people that leave that event thinking, I really enjoyed talking to Lloyd, rather than thinking, what can I share with these people to make them trust me more? What can I talk about myself? Just think, what can I ask them that's going to really show an interest in them?
It's also much more enjoyable if you give someone the focus and you're properly listening and you're genuinely interested in so they're saying, oh yeah, so my son, he's playing for Crystal Palace under 18s. He's getting on really well. If you're genuinely like, oh, that's interesting, and think of what you would want to know about that, it's much more interesting than just thinking, I've got to get through this conversation.
Yeah, it's actually enjoyable.
I had this recently, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in football and stuff. So I was like, oh, at that age, do they have much focus on the mental health rather than the physical health? Because obviously these young players that are that are suddenly put into the limelight. I imagine that must be quite hard. And I was genuinely interested. And then he was sort of saying, yeah, now it's a massive part in the youth as well of these clubs. They talk about that and social media and mental health as well as physical health and nutrition. And then we're having a conversation.
And you've both probably left that thinking, I loved talking to that guy.
Yeah. Whereas if I was just like, oh, I've got to show some sort of value or whatever.
That sounds interesting. I run a video and social media marketing agency.
Yeah, exactly. So I do think it's much more when you do actually focus on those chats and actually ask things that you're interested in. And also you don't have to pretend you're not interested in something.
Yeah.
If I hated football at that point, I could be like, oh, I really don't know much about football at all. And then ask a question like, oh, is Crystal Palace a big club? And then they'd probably be like, oh, fair enough, we don't have this in common, but he's actually asking about this and you could find out a bit more.
I had that a lot with, I'm actually not that into football, but all my friends are, and also my fiance's dad is really into football. So when I first met him, and it was the classic, like, what team do you support?
Yeah.
And obviously I didn't know anything. I made an effort to be like, oh, you support Margate? Tell me about them. What, and it makes it a bit nicer.
Yeah. And even though he didn't like you, you stuck around for long enough.
Yeah, I'm still here now.
To deal with it. Yeah.
Another couple of takeaways from that book, such simple things. This is something I'm really bad at, but I want to get better at, is remembering names. So this is
That's an interesting point, Clark.
That's
not your name.
Shut up. This is a point from the book. The average person is more interested in their name than in all the other names on earth put together. Like, if you think about it, when you're speaking to someone, and I've noticed this after reading this book, when someone says Dan, I'm more like, oh, they've remembered my name. They're actually rather than just. But I really struggle with remembering names. You're probably better at this than me, aren't you?
I still panic though. Do you know what? I'm better than I think, because I quite often I use people's names a lot when I'm talking to them, like if I've meeting them for the first time and stuff. Really, just to show that politeness of, by the way, I actually give a shit and I'm listening and I know what your name is. But I also panic that I've got it wrong. So quite often I'm like, so Stuart, what do you think? Sorry, Stuart was your name, wasn't it? and nearly always it is, but I panic that I've got it wrong.
You just have to check.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. And if people do call you by your name, something clicks and you're like, oh, this person's actually listening to me.
Another one, which just the final one I'll share, which you spoke about earlier, is be a good listener. I think, like you said before, there's a middle ground of people that you meet and are kind of trying to do the right thing by showing interest, but you can tell that they don't actually give a shit, because when you come back with your answer to their question, they sort of drift off. And you can tell, and then you have to sort of bring them back in like, no, I'm here, I'm talking about this thing, because they don't even have a follow-up question. I think that's something that can demonstrate you're listening, is when you ask a point and they're talking, really listen, and then like you did with the Crystal Palace thing, and ask a follow-up question which really demonstrates you listened to the previous point, so that you can get maybe more depth to what they're saying, or more context to what they're saying.
You can tell when people kind of have a strategy to get to know people, but then they don't actually care. It's when they ask the first question. So, really interested to hear about this thing. And then you start answering.
The next question.
And then they're kind of like, oh,
where are you from?
Really interested to hear about this thing? And then you're like, oh, no, you're just saying that. You're not listening to any of it, and you're not interested.
I do think it takes a lot of mental capacity to be good in those kind of situations.
That's probably why you struggle with it.
Thanks. I do think, like, being self-analytical, you're much better naturally at this than me. So I feel like I do have to put more effort in to be really focused and I feel like I lose.
Keep yourself in the room and present.
I lose concentration quite quickly. So I really have to think like, right, I really want to listen to this person and stuff. And then and then when I think about it, I can be good at it.
Yeah.
But sometimes
I think we all have to make an effort though. There's a million different things and people that want our attention all the time, and that our brains are constantly, it's like, there's a show where there's a dog and he's like, squirrel. And I'm like, whenever I do think like human brains like that as well. It's like talking to you, and then I might see someone that I met 6 months ago and haven't seen for ages, and I'm thinking, oh, there's Dave over there, and your brain's going, I've got to speak to Dave. Oh, Dave's a legend.
Yeah.
But and actually, this person's still talking, and then your brain's going, are they prawn vol au vents? Oh, lunch looks pretty good. I like vol au vents. Haven't had them since the 90s. And like our brains do go. So you do have to. I think it does take effort for anyone to keep yourself.
How
engaged.
do you stop thinking about the vol au vents and stay in the conversation?
That's something I struggle with. Mainly food-based thoughts I struggle with. Yeah, I think it's just effort, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's just the effort of, the things we've been saying of genuinely try and make sure you're listening and keep engaged. And then I think, and being okay with when it gets to a point of, I do want to speak to Dave or I do want a prawn vol au vent. If you've genuinely been listening.
Sorry, we're going to have to cut this off. I just want a prawn vol au vent.
Well, no, I think if you've genuinely been listening and you've been having a good conversation.
Well, you would say that.
Well, it's
I was going to cut this off. I want a prawn vol au vent.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it like that, but I think it's more acceptable if you've genuinely shown that you care about a conversation, you're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Then people are much more accepting. You're going, I'm actually starving. I'm going to go get some food, rather than if you're just like you're not. Someone's talking to you like I don't care, and then you go, I'm going to get a vol au vent. Then they're like, they literally didn't care about that, and then they've just gone off to get a prawn vol au vent.
Have you ever done a thing at a network event where you said you can't get away from someone, and you say you're going to go to the toilet?
Yes, loads of times.
Yeah.
But I think it's getting out those conversations with people that are doing that fake thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to give this time if you're not.
No.
If you're not actually listening to me, I don't want to be listening to you anymore.
I am going to go get a vol au vent.
Yeah. 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 So I've done that lots of times. There's only so many times you can go. I'm actually going to go to the toilet again, Steve.
I've been 7 times in the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'll get some Imodium on the way back, actually, Steve. But hopefully won't bump into you again. Okay. See you later.
Cool. Do you have any more, any other advice, I guess, for relationship building or anything else that could be useful to our anchors?
No.
Okay.
No, sorry. I think I've said everything I have to say. Do you have any advice, Dan?
No, I just think definitely read the book. Read How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's not as wanky as it sounds, and it's fairly short compared to other books. So it's an easy read, and you'll learn a lot, and it's really helped us. So
yeah. Simple thing. Just don't be a dick and be a genuinely nice person and listen to people. That's the first stage of any relationship building.
What was that?
Hey! Oh, Clark, you are a laugh.
But yeah, well, I guess we'll
see you in your ears next week.